Did everybody get a chance to read through everything? We do have an amendment to the agenda because we specifically added the psilocybin thing.
Could you state the time?
Oh, 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Roll call.
Counselor Casares.
Aye.
Counselor Seha.
Aye.
Counselor Ecclestone.
Aye.
Counselor Lee.
Aye.
Counselor Sini.
Aye.
Counselor Wick.
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. So first thing first, we have a presentation from Angie Albee from Oregon Health Authority. I got to spend about, I don't know, what was it? About an hour on the phone with you, Angie? Something like that. So she has a presentation that just kind of goes over some of the high level stuff with psilocybin before we get into that later on in the meeting. It's all you, Angie.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Please let me know if you need me to turn the volume up or project louder. It's been a long day, so I want to make sure you can hear me. For the record, my name is Angie Albee, and I'm the section manager for the newly created Oregon Psilocybin Services section. We're housed within the Oregon Health Authority Public Health Division Center for Health Protection. And the Center for Health Protection is the predominantly regulatory arm of the Public Health Division. We do radiation protection services, drinking water services, and a whole host of other types of regulatory programs and other programs as well. Our goal is for public health and safety protection. And so I'm happy to be here today. I want to make the best use of your time. And so I'm happy to provide a very broad overview or high level overview of what Measure 109 is. And then I'm happy to really turn it over to all of you so that you can have your questions answered and make sure that, again, this is a good use of your time. Does that work for everyone? Just to give me a few minutes to present? Okay. I'm not going to put slides in front of you unless you really want me to, but I'll just start by saying that, many of you are very familiar with a lot of the research that's coming out from medical and academic institutions regarding the potential benefit of psilocybin for addressing anxiety, depression, trauma, end-of-life anxiety, and also addiction, specifically alcohol and tobacco, but there's a lot of research still underway about the impact it could have on addiction issues. And so I just want to start by saying, if you're interested in this research, you're not familiar with it, on our website, which I'll provide for all of you in the chat box, if you go to the scientific literature review, it'll give you a broad understanding of that research. Our Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which is made up of 16 voting and 2 non-voting members, many of which are medical professionals, mycologists, and other professionals, have really come together. They did a preliminary review of the scientific literature and research available on psilocybin and pulled together that scientific literature review. And so, welcome to take a look. There were some recommendations made after that review, and our advisory board continues to, be committed to updating that information as time moves forward and we evolve out this work. I also wear a secondary hat in addition to being the section manager for the section, and that is that I am the ex officio executive director of the advisory board that makes recommendations to OHA, and I help support that process. So I'll start with just giving a basic overview. It's really important to understand what Measure 109 is and isn't. First of all, this is not similar to cannabis. It's not a dispensary model. People will not be able to go purchase psilocybin and take it off site with them. This model is very specific. Clients over the age of 21 will be able to consume or purchase and consume psilocybin at a licensed service center under the supervision of a licensed facilitator that's been trained through an OHA approved training program. And only during an administration session, which is one of 3 sessions that basically make up psilocybin services. And so it's important to note that this doesn't create a consumer market. It does not allow for interstate commerce. And it creates a licensing and regulatory framework in which our section will be providing those services. So we'll be licensing the 4 license types, which I can describe in a moment. And then we're going to provide compliance, regulatory oversight over those licensees. And so just to let you all know, it also does not allow our licensees to interact with the unregulated market. Currently, there's, an unregulated market across the nation, including, in the Pacific Northwest. And so what this does is create, a safer framework for people to be able to access these services. It is not a medical or clinical model, and so it does not require a prescription or a referral from a medical doctor, but or provider, but it very much is a health model. It's housed within the Oregon Health Authority, so it's a health and wellness model, and really kind of working towards that prevention work that we do, providing clients options. And this specifically is providing folks with an option to participate in psilocybin services. Our team is divided into 3 parts. We've got our policy and engagement team, our licensing team, and our compliance team. I'm the manager of the overall section, and we're keeping relatively small because we're a fee-based program. So the cost of license fees has to cover the cost of our section's work. And we want to be sure that, we're helping licensees become successful business owners, most of which will be small business owners in Oregon. And we don't want those license fees to be unaffordable and out of control. The other thing we're doing is we're partnering with the Secretary of State's Office of Small Business Development, and we're putting on a fall forum later this fall where licensees will have an opportunity to hear from business experts, which is not our agency, we're a health agency, and to really be able to understand the risks and some of the challenges associated with getting involved in this work. So we're looking forward to that. And I just want to, underscore that in order for this model to work in a successful way, we want to be sure that our licensees are successful and they understand how to be in compliance with statute and rule, especially when working with a Schedule I substance. So that's really important to us, as well as safety of clients and of facilitators involved in this work and those folks working at those licensed service centers. I'll move forward with just describing quickly the 4 license types and then providing a little bit of an overview about those license types. I won't go in too far in depth. I want to keep you awake. And I'll also then kind of stop and turn it over to all of you to ask any questions you might have. First of all, a manufacturer license. This is for someone who is licensed to cultivate psilocybin. It cannot be cultivated outdoors under Measure 109. This particular license type has to have defined boundaries. It cannot exceed production limits. So OHA has to set production limits. And also must demonstrate that the property itself, that the property owner, if it's not the licensee, has consented to psilocybin production. Greater than 50% of the license holders have to be Oregon residents. That's a way to provide an opportunity for Oregon businesses to get started early. And the other piece that's really important to understand is, again, we've already adopted products and testing rules associated with psilocybin products. I'll get to the testing lab piece in a moment, but all products will be tracked in a tracking system from spore to sale. If you think about spores, you think about them similar to seeds of plants, but because fungi and psilocybin, they're not plants, they're fungi. We say spore to sale. So we'll be tracking all of those transactions. And it's also just important to note that we're centering on the clients receiving services, not on the product itself. So this isn't, again, a consumer market that's being created. And so we've started off under the advisory board's recommendation to begin with 1 species of mushroom. There's over 180 species of psilocybin producing mushrooms that grow throughout the world, in the US and in the Pacific Northwest included. And so it's important to note that we did just start with 1. Testing labs will test for the species identification and the potency of the products, and we'll have specific rules about packaging, labeling, and other components of this. OHA can request under our current rules. We've adopted, additional testing, heavy metals, pesticides, or microbials if we think we need to do that. We'll have a testing lab license. Testing labs are required to be accredited by the Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, a big word that we call ORLAP in short. And those testing labs will then be also licensed by OHA under our section. And all testing results have to be tracked in our product tracking system. Facilitator licenses. These are folks that are present with clients as they, access psilocybin services. They start with a preparation session, and client intake is a part of that. It's specified in Measure 109, which is codified in law already in Oregon law and ORS 475A, if you want to take a look. But a facilitator must pass through an OHA approved training program, which is also licensed under the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, or otherwise known as the HEC, in order to participate in this work. They have to be an Oregon resident, that expires in 2025. They must pass an exam that's administered by OHA, and we've also required in the rules we adopted in May that they have to pass a comprehensive training program exam as well. They cannot transfer psilocybin products to clients. So the licensed service center sells the product to clients. The clients consume the psilocybin on site and stay there for the duration of the administration session, which the facilitator is there to help with. Think of it as someone to ensure that if you need your eyes covered, or you need quiet, or you want some music, or you need help getting up and going to the restroom, that's a licensed facilitator. Also, if there's any kind of serious issue coming up, they can help kind of de-escalate, and also, and when in need, calling emergency services, which according to a lot of research that we have, generally speaking, there's psilocybin tends to be, according to the research, fairly safe in the sense that you can't overconsume, and we will have a maximum amount of dosage for psilocybin in our rules as well. The last license type I'm going to talk about is a service center license. This is, again, greater than 50% ownership, has to be Oregon residents, and cannot be located within 1,000 feet of a school, must have defined boundaries. This is the only place that can purchase psilocybin from a licensed manufacturer that's been tested by a licensed testing lab, and the only time that, the only place that can sell to a client, and it has to be on site for an administration session. Only authorized employees that are permitted through the OHA worker permit program can transfer products to clients. And that's important to note. We will be setting up additional requirements about what the preparation, administration session, and integration session are based on Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board recommendations. According to Measure 109, the board had until June 30th to make those recommendations to OHA. So we'll be drafting all of those final recommendations for our rulemaking this fall. Finally, again, I mentioned the preparation session. This is client intake, informed consent, really an opportunity for a licensed facilitator and a client to determine whether or not this facilitator believes that taking on this client is within their capacity, and the client has the time to consider if this is right for them after going over informed consent and after going through that intake process. If everything looks good and there's an agreement between both, then the preparation session or the administration session can be scheduled. The administration session, there will be a dosage and a duration tied to that dosage. So if someone takes a specific amount, they stay at a licensed service center for the duration of that time. And then finally, the integration session is an opportunity for licensed facilitators to work with clients to ensure that they're referred to community resources, peer support networks, other referrals as needed, and also provides an opportunity for them to have that support and safety and support planning as a part of that process. A lot of times after people have had psilocybin experiences, they've reported, that they've had tremendous, it's been a tremendous event that's allowed them an opportunity to take a look at what's coming next. And a lot of folks find that having peer support to integrate that process is really important to them. The last thing I'll just say is local governments have the opportunity to adopt ordinances to prohibit service centers and manufacturers from operating in their local jurisdictions, but those ordinances have to be passed on and approved by voters at the next general statewide election. Local governments also can set time, place, and manner restrictions. So reasonable regulations on hours and location and operations of licensees or of licenses are part of that. Finally, for every service center and manufacturer, a land use compatibility statement has to be signed. So we will not issue a license to a licensed service center or manufacturer until a land use compatibility statement has been signed by the local jurisdiction. This is important because we want to make sure that this licensee is being licensed within the appropriate local land use zoning and other requirements. There's so much more to say, but what I will say is Measure 109 requires that OHA adopt rules by December 31st of this year. We worked last year with lots of partners to determine what we needed to expedite and prioritize and rule. And then after we worked with those partners and identified what rulemaking needed to take place first, we released a rulemaking timeline that was released and published last year. And so we've been working to that, and we'll be going through the last part of our rulemaking this fall, adopting those rules December 31st of this year, and then starting to open up to begin accepting licenses January 2nd of 2023. I hope this is helpful, and I am happy to answer any questions you have with the time that is left over.
Anybody have any questions? I know I have a list, but I'll let you guys.
Questions. So based off of the framework that you're working with currently and kind of developing, is there like a certain maybe country or set of countries you've looked at that have a system in place and are maybe trying to develop policies kind of based off of a little bit of what that country may be doing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a really important question. And there's been, just for everyone to know, there's already been a robust amount of psilocybin services happening around the world, places like Mexico, Jamaica, where psilocybin is not a Schedule I illegal substance. There's a lot to be learned from those unregulated psilocybin services. One of those things is, how to ensure that we're protecting clients and also providing client consent for specific issues. And also just a lot of considerations that we've learned from by listening to speakers come over the past year and visit with the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board and its 5 subcommittees. There's a lot of research we've poured over. There's a lot of information that's out there. And so we definitely have considered lessons learned, some of the strengths, some of the challenges, some of the places where we have opportunities to create a more like a safer and really more accessible model. And then also taking a look at, even though we're a fee-based program, how do we create opportunities for accessibility for those folks that, want to have the option to participate, but might be low income or, might be on a limited income and want to participate. There's a lot of end-of-life anxiety that has been addressed through psilocybin, as well as trauma for veterans. And, we want to make sure we're providing opportunities for folks. We don't have additional funds to do that, but we are looking at the ways that we structure our license fees to provide opportunities so those costs don't get passed down to folks. Does that help answer the question? I'm sorry. I hope it's a little bit helpful. Yeah,
no, that definitely helps. Is there conversations going on with Kaiser, Providence, perhaps some CCOs regarding potentially covering these services? Or would this be something that at least probably in the first phase would be something that one would pay out of pocket, for something like that?
Yeah, so because psilocybin is still right now a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substances Act, even though the FDA has, basically said that this is a breakthrough therapy, and, there's a lot of research happening that kind of stopped in the 1970s, but it has been pretty robust before the 70s, before it was made illegal. And so, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, because of the status, the classification, insurance won't be able to cover it. Now, if the DEA, if there's some work done on the federal level and, and there's a big pharma that comes out with a psilocybin product, then potentially that'll be a great way to introduce it through the medical model. I think that the medical model could be important for addressing those complex diagnoses, but wouldn't get to everyone. And there's a lot of folks that are really interested in participating. We did a community interest survey, for example, and over 94% of the respondents are interested in accessing services, interested in doing it, don't want to do it in the unregulated space, want to do it in a safer model like Measure 109. And so it's really profound, the responses we got back, and you can look that up on our website. But ultimately, this would not be covered by insurance. And there is a huge conversation happening within the psilocybin community, and with a lot of folks interested in getting involved in this, whether they're professionally licensed through other professional licensing boards within Oregon or not. There's a big conversation about how to create opportunities to subsidize the cost of services for folks that can't afford it. We don't have the statutory authority at OHA under Measure 109 to control or regulate the cost of products or services, but we're looking at recommendations that have come from the advisory board on creating social equity plans to make sure that those folks are well served. And so there are incentives that we can build into rule, to try to achieve that, even though we don't have the statutory authority to actually require it at this time.
Right, thank you.
So just kind of a follow-on question to that, looking at if there were a shift towards a greater medical model and insurance programs were covering this, under OHA's current rules, would that allow insurance programs to require a referral and or a diagnosis before paying for a service like this?
Yeah, so I wish I could, but I can't predict the future of where all this will go and evolve. And what I can say is that in order for insurance companies to be able to cover, I think there's got to be a lot of work about the classification and the scheduling of psilocybin, and that's on the federal level. And although we'll work closely with federal partners as much as possible, that's something left to more of the advocacy. There's a huge decriminalization movement. Measure 110 passed, which decriminalized personal amounts of substances, and across the nation, there's decriminalization. So much so that there's a robust psilocybin market and psychedelic market that's booming right now. And so we think Measure 109 can be a really good option for folks that would like to try this under a well-regulated framework. But until some changes happen, I just don't know what the future will hold. And, of course, we'll be open to discussing with partners and understanding our statutory authority. Any changes, of course, have to go through the legislature to change the law now that it's codified in Oregon statute. And but anything that's related to statute would have to be changed by the legislature, but any changes in rules, we're definitely going to be open to, and listening to our advisory board continue to have conversations as we evolve out this process. So we're in the very beginning stages, but we are first in the nation, and we have a lot of opportunities here to really help a lot of people who are interested in this option for health and wellness and would prefer to do it under the regulated structure of Measure 109 instead of in the unregulated space.
I've still got my list, but I want to make sure you guys.
In the production of the fungi, is there going to be regulations regarding odors?
Well, the interesting thing is that psilocybin is mushrooms are very different than cannabis. So the issues that a lot of people have experienced in cannabis, the odors, the space, the water and electric consumption, that doesn't exist with psilocybin, and this will be indoor cultivation. The environments have to be very hygienic and also have to be fairly cool in order for this the fungi to be able to be, to grow successfully into fruiting bodies. And so, there's been no known odor issue, and the substrates that we've allowed, that does not include dung. So there's not going to be, these mushrooms wouldn't be grown on a dung substrate, which, would alleviate any kind of concern there with that kind of odor from what it's grown on.
Well, just growing up in the Salem area with the mushroom plant, we dealt with that a lot. So I want to make sure We aren't going to have to again.
Yeah, I would imagine that since we have to set production limits for the amount of psilocybin that actually can be produced to meet the needs. Again, this is not a consumer market, so I cannot imagine that there would be a large plant anywhere. And because it has to be within defined spaces, and in order for this to be successful and produce successful fruiting bodies, I can't imagine that this would be a large operation such as the plant you may or may not be referring to. But there haven't been known odors associated with this. We also, when we did set up the rules for the products, we allow for extracts, but we've eliminated some of the extraction methods that contain harmful chemicals that are, concerning. So if you take a look at those rules, you'll see that we've really kind of pared that down and limited it a lot. Yeah.
I know I've seen outside cost assessments. Does OHA have any estimated cost currently on what, one use would end up being over the course of the, 2 appointments and the product itself?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and unfortunately, I don't have an answer because, again, the licensees set the cost of the product and services. I will say that we are looking at ways to, again, look at equity and access related to our license fees so that low-income folks can participate in licensure. There's a lot of veterans on limited incomes that would like to be licensees and other folks. And so we're just taking a look now at how we can affect good change through the license fee structure, even though the cost of license fees have to cover the cost of our budget. All of that said, the board again made recommendations to create social equity plan requirements. And so we're considering that for licensees, which would really help, kind of create a prioritization for those folks that really want to access services and can't. I don't have an estimate because we can't regulate the cost of products or services. But I can say I've heard lots of numbers, and to be honest with you, I think it's going to depend a lot on the actual model. There are going to be varying types of service centers. I've heard of folks that are really interested in providing services to community members that are low income or that are veterans, or very specifically are going to have a difficult time perhaps accessing funds for these services. And so we have everything from there to maybe service centers that are kind of looking more at bringing people to a retreat model, which would mean that only during the administration session in a licensed grant, like the only place even in that setting that psilocybin services could take place, the administration session specifically, is in the defined premise that we license. So that's really important to remember, is every licensed service center has to have a defined premises. And it's really important to understand that there are going to be specific requirements related to where the administration sessions can take place. Those rules will be out in early September to review, but our focus is really to ensure that business owners are able to set up models that might be helpful for the types of communities they're serving around the state. The state has different needs based on where you are, and so we wanted to make sure that we're really focused on safety, making sure we're licensing within the structure of Measure 109, but also offering Oregonians the opportunity to reflect what's needed in their communities best.
Can you just briefly kind of give an overview of the makeup of the regulatory board?
Yeah, so actually the advisory board is different. They don't have regulatory or decision-making authority. They're an advisory board, so they make recommendations to OHA. We honor that process, very much so, but it's important to note that we have, under Measure 109, the statutory authority to make decisions, and we are the regulatory structure. So we will be the ones to license and then regulate to those licenses. That said, the advisory board definitely is so important to this process as we evolve. These members serve 4-year terms, and that's a long time and that's an investment. And they've done a tremendous job so far with all of the recommendations they've made. If you look within the measure, and I'm just going to kind of pull it up here, you have a number of folks that Measure 109 has, Measure 109 specifies the membership. So it's important to just understand that, you've got folks like harm reduction specialist, you have someone that's an expert in academia, you have a local public health officer, you've got a couple of members that are delegates from public health, you have you've got someone that's has experience in pharmacology related to these substances. And so I can provide you with a follow-up list. I'm trying to pull it up, but because I have this slide presentation, I'm having a challenge getting it there, but I can read the list to you really quickly. I just was able to pull it up. If you'd like to know, there's like 18 members. So if you want me to, I'm happy to start.
I guess kind of what I was looking at more is, if I'm not mistaken, the advisory committee does have medical professionals, correct?
Yes, psychologist, physician, naturopath, harm reduction specialist. We've got palliative care and quality of life, interdisciplinary advisory council. We have federally recognized Indian tribe. We have technical expertise in the field of public health, health officer, psychopharmacology, ethnobotany, mycology. So the list goes on and on. We also have Department of Justice as a member of the advisory board. And again, 16 voting members, 2 non-voting members, and then 5 subcommittees, and some members of those subcommittees are not governor appointed. So, one subcommittee is additional 17 people bringing expertise, into these conversations. It's been really robust. They've been meeting since March of last year. I was hired in June because we had to wait for the legislature to provide us with a budget authority to hire our staff and our team. And I've been building out our team ever since, but the board has been hard at work. They've met all of their statutory requirements, and we just got over the benchmark of recommendations to OHA by June 30th. And it's tremendous. We've posted all of their recommendations on our website. So you can go to under the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board and take a look at that document. Some of the recommendations didn't reach all aspects of what we need to regulate to. So our rules are much more robust than those recommendations, but it's a good start to see where those conversations have been over the past year and a half.
So do you mind if I have
go ahead.
a question? So this is not my area of expertise, but just one thing that's kind of going through my mind. I know that we're talking about the topic and bouncing around all over the place and really focused on it. But one of these service centers, for those that aren't familiar with it, what are other kinds of things that could be done at a service center? What other treatments, because I'm sure that somebody's not just going to open up a facility to just do this one treatment, that they're going to have licenses for other things and be able to do other treatments for individuals. And what are kind of some of those things, some examples, just for any common folk like myself that would like to get a better idea of what's happening at these treatment service centers?
Yeah, that's a great issue to bring up. And so I'm going to break it down into 2 pieces. The second I'll talk about is scope of practice, because that's important for professionally held licenses in Oregon. The first half related to your question, licensed service centers cannot be subject to ORS 441. And that is the part of Oregon statute that is related to hospitals and healthcare systems. Extended stay centers. We actually regulate through our healthcare regulation and quality improvement all of those spaces under 441. So it would not be able, a licensed service center could not be licensed and also be licensed under 441 in the same location. And so there's some other factors to that without going too far in depth. We've looked at, it's important to note that a licensed service center wouldn't be a licensed service center on Monday, but not Tuesday, and Wednesday, but not Thursday. If you're a licensed service center, you have to follow all of the requirements in our statute and rule for the entire duration of time during, like it doesn't matter if it's, again, you have to follow all of the requirements. So that's 24 hours a day, every day of the week. So when you're licensed as a service center, you will always have to meet those requirements. All of that said, we've been looking at some important recommendations that have come from folks and members of the public who have said, I'm thinking about doing something like this. And if I have a defined premises where administration sessions can take place, could I also have a separate location to do A, B, or C? And I think that those are important questions that folks are asking. And so we're looking at, basically setting up in rules some specifications. And one of those things that's important is specifically the administration session. That's going to have to be a very defined premise. And it's important that, perhaps we'll have to look at co-location opportunities. I think that we want to provide opportunities for folks to be able to create licensed service centers and to provide administration sessions. But it's important to note that we're going to have very strong requirements about storage of product and about the way that that product is secured on site and on premise, and have a possession limit. So, there's a specific maximum, and all of that will be an important part of this work. So they'll have to adhere to that all of the time. I know that doesn't give you a really concrete example, but because we don't start licensing until January 2nd, we haven't seen the myriad of examples that might come to us. We have heard of community centers where, these locations would be separate, still under the same property owner, right? Who's given permission, but maybe, one side of the building is this and another side of the building is this. We've had interesting examples that have been brought to us, but because we haven't finalized our rules yet, and we really want to hear from our rulemaking advisory committees and members of the public to make sure that we're really adopting really important rules that consider different scenarios. I can't give you any concrete examples yet, but it's something that we're definitely looking at. All of that said, if it's a licensed premises, a licensed service center, it will be responsible for being subject to statute and rule all of the time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Under the current rules that are out there, which I know are not very many, does this allow for refusal of care? If someone comes in and they have a documented history of substance abuse, or this is their 4th time coming in this week, are the facilitators allowed to refuse care?
Yeah, so that's really important. And I forgot about scope of practice. So let me talk about this and then I'll get into scope of practice really briefly. Yes, under Measure 109, it's important that a licensed service center, if they don't see that they're capable of taking on the specific client that comes to him or her, or them, but if they're meeting with a client for a preparation session, they go through the client intake and informed consent. The client can say after working, after going through this, you know what? I'm not sure about this. I'm not gonna, schedule an administration session yet. Thank you. Or a facilitator can say, you know what, perhaps you need to work with your provider and consider whether or not psilocybin services are right for you. At this time, I'm unable to take you on as a client, but I might have a number of other licensed facilitators, that I know of that would be better suited, to work with you, or perhaps, it's a conversation about working with a provider. I know that these rules aren't, finalized yet, but we've had some really, really important conversations in the advisory board and subcommittee meetings, really talking about this issue. And, under Measure 109, you can come in for psilocybin services and access them. But if a facilitator is unable to meet the needs of the client, or the client decides it's not right for them, there's definitely going to be that possibility. I think it also brings up a really important conversation about, is there something else that, a referral to 211 or community resources might be helpful for. And so that's something that has been considered in those discussions as well. Briefly, I'll just tell you about scope of practice. Last year we worked with a number of Oregon's professional licensing boards just to give a heads up and to have a conversation. And ultimately, if someone is licensed under one of Oregon's professional licensing boards and wants to be a licensed service or licensed facilitator and provide psilocybin services, it's just important for them to work with their boards so that they understand, maybe some of the ethical requirements, and also if they're DEA licensed prescribers, they most likely wouldn't be able to be licensed as facilitators under Measure 109 because that's federal licensure. All of that said, I think that there's a large number, if you look at our community interest survey, a large number of counselors, therapists, psychologists, social workers that are really interested in getting involved with this work and being licensed facilitators. And so, we see that there could be folks coming in to access services that might just need kind of a minimal level of facilitator knowledge, and then some folks that might need those referrals to the professionally licensed folks. All of that said, one would not be able to practice one scope of practice for their professional licensure while they're practicing under Measure 109. That said, they might have a lot of education and skills to offer. They could really be beneficial to clients both before and after psilocybin services. Those folks would still have to go through an OHA approved training program and pass the exams associated with it as well.
And then my last question is just, when we talked on the phone, I kind of expressed that it was, I guess, a little irritating that, based on the timeline, cities are being asked to put it on the ballot whether they're going to opt in or opt out. And there's still so many unknowns, and applications for licensure you're going to start accepting them in January. What's the time frame we're looking at on that application process? When would we potentially see people show up with valid licensure? Is that a 6-month process, a 1-month process? Do we even really know?
So for two things, I really, empathize. We reached out last year to local government partners to try to pull us together. And I know that there were other things going on like COVID response and so many other issues with local governments. So I'm sensitive to the sense of urgency. I really wish we could have worked last year to develop our rulemaking timeline and really understand the needs. But here we are now together. And so I'm sensitive to that. And what I will say is that local governments are kind of the gatekeepers through the land use compatibility statements. We have to ensure that licensees produce an approved land use compatibility statement before they can even apply for a license under OHA. So we have to be sure that they meet local government zoning and other requirements, related to your zoning laws and land use laws. We're not experts in those zoning or land use laws, and you do have time, place, and manner restrictions you can set, or regulations that you can set, and some of that is based on location. And so, I think local governments, would ultimately be the first, to kind of say, okay, we know that people will be reaching out and applying for licensure, but for service centers and manufacturers, they would have to have a statement before coming to us for licensure. And the other piece that it's important to remember is we're working on a standardized LUX form that makes sense for psilocybin, so local governments don't have to come up with that themselves. So that way it's a little bit easier, a little bit less stuff to work on local government shoulders. But indeed, that will be a requirement, and that's in Measure 109.
So, but as far as the licensure process, once the application reaches OHA, we don't really have a timeline on how long that's going to take.
Well, it depends on how many people apply. I think that we'll see some applications come in January. I think others might take some time. I know a lot of people are working intentionally to set up their businesses and might need a little bit more time and maybe applying closer to Q2 or Q3 of next year. All of that said, as soon as we get, we're working right now, I forgot to mention, on an internal system where it's called our training program licensing and compliance case management system. We refer to it as TLC, and we've had some great success with training programs. We've already started accepting applications for training program approval. They're not licensed by us, so we were able to expedite that in our expedited rulemaking process that I talked about earlier. We went live June 6th, accepting applications from them. To date, we've taken about 2 to 3 weeks to approve that process. They're a little simpler with a curriculum approval. And then a licensee will be with all of the other requirements associated with like school proximity and other issues. We'll have to go out and inspect folks on site. If you're a service center or a manufacturer or testing lab, that'll require an inspection by us. But we expect that our team will be up and running and ready to go January 2nd. We're already developing the TLC system further for licensees and for compliance work. And we're building into that system a lot of capabilities that help expedite the process and help the licensee think through, what they need to have available and ready to go. We're going to put on a lot of training for both our product tracking system and our TLC system. And if folks want to apply through a paper application, we'll still accept it. But the TLC system will be an online way to do that. It's cloud-based, and we're really looking forward to that efficiency and, think it'll really help the process. We don't have a general timeline yet. We're still waiting to hire the rest of our team, and we're in some state infrastructure lines with other state agencies to get approvals for that. But we're confident, and we've done a lot of great work. We have a great team of people with a lot of expertise setting up this work. So I think it just depends on how many applications we receive in January and what that line looks like, really.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
I have one question on some of the paperwork that was given to us. In one part, it says that Measure 109 requires service centers not be located within the limits of an incorporated city or town on property zoned for residential use and within 1,000 feet of a public or private elementary or secondary school with certain exceptions.
Yeah.
So if it's not to be located within a city or town, how are people going to get to the services?
Yeah, so actually it can be located within city limits. Our interpretation of statute is the word "and" is not, it's both. So if you look at the language of the statute, it says within city limits and not within an exclusively residentially zoned area. So as long as it's not in an exclusively residentially zoned part of city limits, then it can be located in city limits. But also that also depends on the reasonable time, place, and manner regulations set by local governments, which include location. So, there is that capability as well. Does that help?
Yes.
And then also, I'm so sorry, I want to just say you're absolutely correct. The school proximity issue, we're working on some GIS mapping functionality to try to make that a little bit easier, but definitely licensees will not be able to be located within 1,000 feet of a school. So that's something that, will be our team will be looking at and ensuring that we've got all the information we need to update it and ready to go for licensure.
Cool. Any other questions?
I had a quick question. Because this would be, I think, technically classified as a service, and obviously not covered by insurance, at least in the, near term, would these centers be able to accept, cash, card, check for those services? Whereas obviously with marijuana, because you're purchasing that substance and taking it home, and because of, federal banking laws and federal law, you can't obviously, usually pay with a debit or credit card. Would that be a similar situation with these sort of services if they were offered?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of efforts being done outside of, it's outside of our statutory authority, but there's a lot of efforts in the psilocybin community to create opportunities for banking and insurance. We know that learned lessons from cannabis that's been a really big difficulty. So there are folks working currently on, ways to help licensees alleviate sort of those barriers or have resources available. At this time, yes, I can't speak on behalf of licensees, but they would accept their payments from clients, and an important part of all of this is security. So making sure that we'll have specific interest in hearing from our rulemaking advisory committee members and members of the public, and really better understanding from lessons learned in cannabis of what the recommendations might be before we finalize our rules. It's a really important part of the conversation and something we're paying attention to. All of that said, some folks in the training program world have been able to access general liability insurance. Others have had a very difficult time. And I think banking will be a similar issue. I can't speak on behalf of banks or credit unions, but I do know that, again, the psilocybin community, there's a lot of folks really working to help alleviate obstacles, and it'll be an issue that we'll have to contend with, but we really want to make sure that we're regulating to safety around that issue and security.
Yep.
I'm
How much
sorry, I couldn't give a more concrete answer. So
How much time you got left, Angie? Because I know you said you were going to be on short time.
I want to make sure your questions are answered. So I can hang tight for another, another 15 minutes or so. Mostly, I just want to make sure it's a good use of all of your time. I know you're busy too.
Yeah, no worries. Ron, you had some questions?
If council's done with their questions, I just have I'll pare them down.
Okay.
I just have a couple. Thank you for coming tonight. It's been actually very informative and appreciate that. So I just have a couple of questions on, is there thought to limiting the number of service providers within a center, or the number of patients within, or customers, whatever we want to call them, within a center?
Yeah, so great question. And just so you know, we're calling folks clients. And so hopefully that's helpful. Just side note for everyone. I know it's a lot of new lingo. So OHA is unable to limit licenses. We've looked into the issue, and we're unable to limit licenses. All of that said, it'll be really important that when our rules come out and the considerations that we've listened to over the past year and a half with the psilocybin advisory board and the discussions there, they've made recommendations on client and facilitator ratio. So it's really important to understand that there's not only going to be regulations around certain dosages and the minimum amount of time someone has to be at the licensed service center in this specific location for an administration session, but there will also be considerations about how many, what the facilitator to client ratio looks like, how many people have to be present, including permitted workers. And so I think it really depends on the size of a licensed service center, on, how many staff they can employ. And, there will only be a limited number of folks allowed in a administration session, depending on whether they're providing a minimal group session or an individual session, and all of that will be addressed and considered in our rulemaking. But there's some great recommendations from the board on the website who have really talked through a lot of this and a lot of recorded meetings. But unfortunately, to your point, I really don't have a direct answer for you right now, but we won't be able to limit licenses. We will be limiting the production of psilocybin products to meet the needs of service centers.
And then what is the authority, or what does the process look like to remove a license if you find somebody that's abusing the system? I know in like the liquor licensing aspect of sales, it's really difficult even for a jurisdiction to weigh in on a problem client. What's that look like in at least your discussions?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold for us. One is, of course, we follow the contested case hearing process, and that's important to note. So there's, of course, we go through the standard process for administrative law, contested case hearing, and I think building up to that point, this is really interesting work with a lot of considerations to be made around, if violations are because people just need to be better educated about what's in a rule or clarifications, if that's something, or if it's something that's, really a serious immediate threat to public health and safety. And so our compliance team will be a part of those investigations. Of course, if there's a criminal investigation going on, that takes precedence, of course. But, really, it's important to note that our compliance program, first of all, we'll be inspecting sites and, making sure that they're in compliance with statute and rule before we issue a license. And those are annual licenses. And then, of course, if we're complaint driven, so if there's a complaint, we'll go out and investigate. And that'll sort of begin the process of our compliance program. And, when we issue a notice or a revocation, it follows what's in law currently.
Okay, and I'm going to try to speed up my questions because I do have a couple I want to get to. Do you have an outline training process, and is that something that you could share? Would it have a medical element to it?
So all of our training program rules have been adopted already. And so they're in 333, 333. If you just go to our website, and I'll put this in the chat box for all of you, head on into our website. If you look under administrative rules, you can see what we've adopted for training program products and testing. All of that training is already, already final based on board recommendations and our rulemaking process. And it does have specific details about the curriculum requirements that we're requiring of training programs. There are some really interesting pieces, and I won't go too far in depth, but I just encourage you to take a look. And then, of course, let me know if you have any questions.
Okay. And we talked a lot about there being medical this being used as some sort of an alternative medical treatment, but it doesn't require a referral or prescription. It's really self-generated as the client. Is that right?
Yeah, so the client has to be 21 years of age or older, and only people 21 years of age or older will be able to be on the licensed premises. That's important to note. And before a client could access psilocybin services, they have to go through a preparation session process, and that's the client intake and informed consent. And that's really getting to know, a client and what they're approaching this through the lens of, and if that facilitator believes that they can provide psilocybin services effectively and safely. And so I think the important thing to note as well, it doesn't require under Measure 109 a referral or a prescription. There will be opportunities. We kind of see this as building a bridge, perhaps back to providers if someone can't take someone on because maybe they encourage a client to speak with their provider about the things we don't know yet because we don't have research on, and just making sure that it's a process that are also there are possibilities for safety and support planning, referrals. There's a robust, I should mention just for your awareness, a robust peer support network already for psychedelics. Psychedelics have a pretty profound space already in the nation and in the Pacific Northwest. And there's a number of peer support lines already available for people if they're accessing psychedelics in the unregulated space to have support through their journeys. And in this sense, there's a number of referrals that people could make for peer support and connecting to other resources as needed in the integration session process. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. And my last question, and this is just, I'm wanting to make sure I have the foundation to do research if I need to. They're outside of those countries that you mentioned earlier, there is no manufacturing facility around that could be visited or viewed. Is that right? Or is there?
So a couple of things, obviously Amsterdam, the Netherlands have had a number of, years of practice with psilocybin producing mushrooms, and that's something that we've drawn. There's been a pretty profound amount of research there and other places. But I think that what's important to note is there's some medicinal mushroom production that is not psychedelic, and that, perhaps could be beneficial in visiting or getting to know better. The difference would be that this isn't for a consumer market and commercial quantities. Again, this has to be done with specific production limits. We're limiting to one specific species, and there's only a certain max number of product that can be produced. So I'm sure that there's always, we have a lot of mycologists and a lot of people with a significant amount of experience in the psychedelic space with psilocybin producing mushrooms. And I also just want to acknowledge that Indigenous communities have used psilocybin for centuries, and psilocybin services, when psilocybin was made illegal federally, it really pushed a lot of that work into the unregulated space. And so there are a lot of practitioners that have a lot of experience, a lot of mycologists and people that operate in the underground that, I think have contributed to a lot of research that exists and are kind of stepping into this space to help people understand their knowledge. But yes, I think that, there's a lot of resources to see how, people actually cultivate even psychedelic psilocybin producing mushrooms. You can find a lot of things online as well. It's just important to note that we'll have very specific regulations for products and for testing, and also for the manufacturers.
Thanks a lot for answering those questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I just have one follow on, Angie. So Ron had asked about limiting of licenses, and you said that, OHA doesn't have the statutory authority to do that. Is there anything to your knowledge that would limit cities from adopting within their time, manner, and use, or under land use, a limitation on licenses within their city limits, limiting it to 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever?
I think that's a fabulous question for your council. So I would defer to your council on really interpreting the statute and kind of working on that question. I would defer there, and yeah.
I kind of figured, I just wasn't sure if there was anything already existing within OHA's rules that covered that, but yeah, that's far more of a legal aspect. Anybody else have any questions at all? All right, well, we appreciate it, Angie. Thank you so much. This has been extremely informative.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I just want to, regardless of where you all land, in your decision making, I just want to keep the door open. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out anytime. And we're really just working to make sure that, we're providing information and being helpful, and also thinking about ways to provide access to folks around the state. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Let's move on. We don't have any attendees, so I'm going to guess there's no public comment. No visitors. Consent agenda. Everybody get a chance to read through everything? We have a motion.
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Vote by roll call.
Counselor Pastorez,
Aye.
Counselor Seha,
Aye.
Counselor Ecclestone,
Aye.
Counselor Lee,
Aye.
Counselor Sini, and Counselor Wick,
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, no old business, new business. We have the West State proposal for water treatment plant improvements. Go for it, Ron.
All right, I'll try to keep this as short as possible, because that was a lengthy discussion and a good discussion. We have a new approved capital facilities plan for our wastewater treatment facility approved by DEQ. So now we're on to the next phase, and the next phase is to conduct an environmental study of the area where our new facility will be. This is an important phase, and we're actually kind of pushing this forward a little faster because we're really trying to make an application deadline for USDA, which I've talked to council about before, and it was tricky 2 months ago if we would make it. It's really tricky now. So there's a couple of actions in your packet tonight, but if you approve the study, we'll move forward with the environmental review. It's not wasted work. If we miss that deadline for USDA, it's going to be required for our applications anyway, but we're really trying to make that deadline. So our consultants are on board. They know what that date is, and they're really trying to help us meet that. Happy to answer any questions. It's a complicated issue, but not a complicated action item because it's simply a contract for an environmental study, and the scope of work is in the packet. Happy to answer any questions if you have it.
Questions? The motion?
Move to approve to authorize the city to enter into a contract with West Tech Engineering for wastewater treatment plant improvements, preliminary engineering and environmental reports. JO 2969.3010.0 for $81,763.
I'll second.
Go by roll call.
Counselor Casares,
Aye.
Counselor Seha,
Aye.
Counselor Ecclestone,
Aye.
Counselor Lee,
Aye.
Counselor Sini,
Aye.
Counselor Wick,
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Moving on, we got the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments Grant Services Contract.
Yeah, and as you know, we use the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments for contract planning services, special projects that we have right now. They're working on our UGB and buildable land analysis work. There was a House Bill 2345 that was approved, leveraging some cost share for administering ARPA grants. And then also the Ford Family Foundation came forward and matched some of those funds for jurisdictions that might not meet that threshold under House Bill 2345. And so we do meet one of the criteria to be able to qualify for these grants. And what that means is we can contract with an agency like Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, and they can assist us in grant administration if we need it. They can assist us in seeking additional grants for things that are covered under ARPA. It doesn't have to necessarily be an ARPA grant, as I understand it, but infrastructure is one of those things. And as you know, we're trying to build a $23 million wastewater facility. So we need assistance seeking some grants, and talk to them about it. And they're kind of excited to jump on board with the project and help us try to find some of that money. The good thing about the grant, it's a 50% cost share. So their service rate is $82 for this type of service. We basically would pay $41, and the rest would be paid for through the foundation or the ledge. And so I say we execute the contract. If we don't use it, we don't pay for it. But if they can leverage some money for us and work at that kind of a rate and help us polish up some of our grant applications, it just makes us in a stronger position. Happy to answer any questions.
I
Move
move
to
to
authorize-
authorize the city administrator to sign the MWV COG contract for grant services.
Seconded.
Go by roll call.
Counselor Casares,
Aye.
Counselor Seha,
Aye.
Counselor Ecclestone,
Aye.
Counselor Lee,
Aye.
Counselor Sini,
Aye.
Counselor Wick,
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, and you got some supporting document for this next action, and I just need a motion, so there's not a staff report. You got that additional supporting document today, but the contract that we just did for the historical or the environmental review, what this is anytime you do an environmental review, it also covers a study for archaeological finds. And there's a requirement by the state that if there are artifacts found, the city takes on the responsibility of preserving, cataloging, doing all the things that you need to do with those artifacts to preserve them and maintain those. And so basically what they just want is an application and a letter. It goes to the state archaeological, archaeological historical preservation office. Okay. And basically it's just our commitment that if any of these artifacts are found, that we're responsible for those. And happy to answer any questions, as long as you don't make me say the name of the office
Yeah.
again.
So if we find some dinosaur bones, we can sell them off and pay for the water treatment facility.
No, I don't think it works like that, but I could ask.
Well, that would have been great.
Like Nick
Start
Cage
digging.
went broke, was he was buying like dinosaur bones and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
castles and whatnot,
Yeah, maybe.
well, something like that.
Yeah.
It's more likely going to be pottery that, somebody was cooking with or something along the creek. I don't know.
Well, now I'm
Yeah.
all excited about dinosaur.
Yeah,
bones.
that's what I was
You
thinking. I
just
was
had to-
like, I mean, what's a
had to
T?
rain all
what's-
over it.
Yeah, yeah. How much is a T-Rex femur? What's that running for nowadays?
We're more likely to find Indian arrowheads and pedestals and bowls out there.
Well,
That's
I'm
just-
still hoping for dinosaur bones.
Well,
Doug.
that just
Yeah.
might be on
I'm
the
just
surface.
telling you,
We gotta go
having lived
deeper.
on Beaver Creek, I know what I have found.
Well, I know, but
We're being hopeful.
They were like prehistoric Indians.
all right. You need a motion on that, Ron?
I do need a motion, but in my haste, I actually skipped C. So if you don't mind making the motion for
Well,
this, so we can go
Yeah,
back to
we
C.
can make a motion on this and then we'll come back to that. So,
And it's just authorizing me to sign the letter.
do we have a motion?
Move to authorize City Administrator Harding to sign a letter on behalf of the city to the State Archaeological Historical Preservation Office regarding our application as presented.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Counselor Casares,
Aye.
Counselor Seha,
Aye.
Counselor Ecclestone,
Aye.
Counselor Lee,
Aye.
Counselor Sini,
Aye.
Counselor Wick,
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So jumping back into the psilocybin stuff, obviously, we talked about this quite a bit last time. We just had a big presentation, all that kind of stuff. I am of the mind that I would like to see this go on the ballot. I do think this is something that the community needs to be able to voice their opinion directly. But I think this opens kind of an awkward door. And I know that this was an issue that I had said I was not going to be bringing up anymore, but I think it would be really weird if we had a moratorium on marijuana, but we were allowing shrooms in town. So
Well, Ron
I,
did mention that they said 54% no, so.
well, what I am saying is I would like to see this go on the ballot, but I think if we are putting this on the ballot, I think it is warranted that marijuana goes back on the ballot.
I
I
agree
was gonna
100%.
bring that up.
I agree.
I was. I'm glad you brought it up. But if you didn't bring it up, I was gonna bring it up. Because it's like.
Yeah. And if we weren't dealing with this is an issue that I had planned to just let rest because that was the commitment that I made to council after the last discussion. But I don't want to see a situation where, we're allowing one substance while we have a moratorium on another. And especially one where there was quite a bit of community support for it being back on the ballot. So I would like to see both go on the ballot. And I think that's fair, given what we are dealing with in regards to, something that is federally illegal, but the state has made illegal or has made legal for these treatment services. I think that makes sense.
I have to jump in here just to let you know that there are some limits to what we can do. The deadline to get things on the ballot is, I think we've got 11 days, August 11th, I believe. And so we've got to get ballot measures written. Now, there's some templates out there right now that we might be able to make some quick work, but our attorneys are extremely busy, and I think it, I can ask, but it's going to be a stretch to try to get them to do 2 ballot measures. The other thing is I think there's a difference between the two, where maybe one could be revisited later. It's been voted on twice by the community.
7 years ago,
This-
and it passed by 15 votes, Ron.
I'm just saying whatever the number is, it has been voted on by the community. So I'm just not sure if there's an urgency for that one. In either case, what I would say to council is, regardless of what happens with your decision tonight, whether you want to put this on the ballot or not put this on the ballot, we should also follow through with a draft code amendment, because if it passes, we are going to want to somewhat direct what's happening as much as we possibly can, because there's 2 issues here that really concerns me. One is there's a vacuum of knowledge, even by those folks that are administering the program, as to where it's going to go. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we've seen this with the marijuana industry and all the other industries. Just because we start off in a starting place with rules and regulations doesn't mean that's where we end up. Once you cite a facility, it's there forever, regardless of what happens with those rules. And so just keep those 2 things in mind related to, as we think of time, place, and manner. That's very limited. It's not like we can say, we only want you to operate this way. We can make it reasonable, and then of course, we'll litigate what's reasonable, I'm sure, at some point in the future. But just keep those things in mind about the psilocybin.
I would like us to reach out to legal counsel to see, does the city have any ability to limit the number of licenses? That's something that even Angie wasn't aware of. I think that is a very important question, especially looking at a draft ordinance.
Right.
Limiting the number of licenses that could be issued in town, I think is warranted based on just size of the town alone. Granted, from a business perspective, it would be stupid for someone to try and open 20 service centers in Aumsville, but that does give us a bit more.
We can't do that. I can tell you right now, we cannot do that. What we could do is, maybe that's a possibility, we could limit the size of the service centers. That I don't know, but that would be more realistic than saying we're going to allow 2 licenses in town. If you did a ballot measure and you said,
No more than 2.
no more than 2, and that was voted on, perhaps that would go. I did speak with our legal counsel about this a couple of times, and the difficulty is they don't know. This is a new issue. It's untested. It's kind of in a gray area. There's probably going to be litigation that will set the direction. And that's what we're going to find out, what you really can do and you can't do. The question.
My thought is, if this does go on the ballot and the voters say, hey, we're fine with this being in town, how do we ensure that the city's approach is a conservative, restrained approach until some of those questions are answered? I don't like to see the level of fear mongering that occurred in regards to marijuana back in the day, but at the same time, there are so many unknowns that we need to have some method that gives the city a few more fingers in the pot.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reason for concern in the discussion that we just had from OHA. The equitability program, what does that look like? Yeah, the reason why there's fear mongering that occurs is because those of us who have been in government for a while have seen these programs be presented in one model, but then turn into something completely different over either a short or a longer period of time. And so that's why there's skepticism. And my position hasn't changed. Council knows what my position is. I think, there's at least 2 courses of action that you could take here, but I haven't heard anything that's changed that. And my concern is this vacuum of information that's there today, much less what might happen in the future.
Let's be honest here. I mean, we're creating a market from scratch. So let's
Yeah.
just understand that. I'm not going to be able, most of us around this table probably are not going to be able to afford those services, even if we wanted them, with insurance not covering. VA has been kind of flexible with covering stuff, and I can see that going that way.
So FDA has already started discussions of lowering psilocybin to Schedule 3. And there have been numerous studies that have gone on through the VA that are FDA approved studies utilizing psilocybin. So I mean, honestly, within 10 years, this conversation may be moot because it may be legal in the medical world as a prescribed substance.
And I mean, because I would imagine, whether there's a regulation or not, if you're someone like myself that has diabetes, I've got, heart issues, got high blood pressure, there's going to be a medical exam involved before anything like that's administered, just to make sure that I am able to withstand something like that. And then, of course, any specialist I have would have to sign off on it. So, I mean, and with insurance not paying for that, that's all out of pocket. I mean, so even if we magically had the Citizens 5149 approved to have it, I don't know if it'd be cost effective anyway in its current form. It would take 5 years, maybe even 10 years before something like that's
the
gonna
cost
happen.
assessments that I referenced, the equivalent US dollars on average, it's sitting at about $1,500. Now, obviously, the OHA is looking at equitability, and so there's probably going to be methods to lower that cost.
Right.
But even some of the concerns about, I think that she brought up in his letter, the homeless population. The likelihood of that happening is extremely minimal, just based on the cost barrier alone. But it is something that, like we discussed, and I'm talking to the original intent was to have it more medically based, but because they run into barriers with licensure, a lot of that they had to kind of tweak the verbiage and change things. And there is no requirement for a referral or a diagnosis.
Yeah.
That does open the door for potential abuse. Hopefully within the training program for facilitators, they're able to identify and ensure that they are providing a mental health service and not a, hey, I've got nothing better to do on a Saturday night service.
Right.
But the latter is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a tremendous amount of liability involved with that. I mean, Oregon is a vicarious liability state. If someone does go out and gets, and they're going to be there the entire time, but if someone were to end up in a situation where they are abusing the substance regularly, and one of these facilities has been a part of that, they're going to be under a tremendous amount of liability. So I have fewer concerns in that regard. And even, the chief brought up potential DUI. I mean, these individuals are likely going to be there 3 to 4 hours for an administration session, and facilitators are not supposed to let them leave until they are sure that they are no longer impaired. There's a possibility that some people tolerate it a little bit better, on the way out the door. But I think that concern is largely minimized given the structure that they're implementing.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty there is it's a private transaction. They're going to make everybody sign a waiver to reduce their
Waivers don't do
liability.
good in Oregon.
I know, it's just, I just see a lot of holes in it, you know what I mean? Not that maybe it doesn't work out. I mean, my worst case scenarios, we've got some 200 unit facility in the corner of town, and it's going gangbusters, and then we're dealing with what's happening to these folks, especially if they're doing, if they're having group sessions of, 50. I'm not sure what the purpose of having a group session is, but apparently that's something that's been advocated for, and it's in the consideration.
Yeah,
And she
and
talked about
even
that
they call them listening sessions. So I had spoken to Angie last week or week before. And that same day, I jumped in on one of their listening sessions, and the next day I did as well. And during those listening sessions, it was interesting to hear because there were individuals who called in who are part of these programs in the Netherlands and in Jamaica and other countries, and kind of giving some of their lessons learned. But there is a push to have large sessions. I don't see how that's going to be viable given the cost associated and looking at the potential requirements for facilitator to people. That's going to be a cost that I doubt a lot of these service centers would even be able to meet, especially the size of a service center that we might see out here.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I will always advocate for things going in front of the voters. So that's my opinion is we put this on the ballot, but I do believe that if we're putting this on the ballot, marijuana needs to go back on the ballot too. And I know that that's going to be a time crunch. That may be difficult, but I think that's the right thing to do. I think that we would run into a very weird situation if we're that town in Oregon where mushrooms are okay, but marijuana's not.
So my question is
that's
there any
just
way we can make a motion to put that on the ballot tonight? Because we only have 11 days, right? Is there a way we can put a motion, to put the marijuana moratorium on the ballot tonight? Since how we're limited to time.
I mean, we can.
Well, we can't, we have to have a ballot measure to approve.
No, but he's asking if we
No.
can motion to have that put on, to go through the process of getting a ballot measure written up.
Oh, yeah. You could direct staff to do that. We'll work on it.
So if our deadline is August 11th, I would like to have that put on a motion for city council to put that on the ballot.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Scott.
I'm saying if our deadline is August 11th, I would like to see that motion go through by our either tonight or next council to have that put on the ballot.
If you want to make that motion, you can make that motion, Scott.
I
Until
motion to
negative.
put that more marijuana moratorium on the ballot.
So motioning to direct staff to draw up a ballot measure.
Yes.
We have a second.
Seconded.
Okay, sorry.
What are we?
So
motioning?
Scott motioned to direct staff to create a draft ballot measure, putting our marijuana moratorium back on the ballot.
So Scott, are you wanting to make a motion to have both the psilocybin and the marijuana? Or are you just motioning the marijuana and then a separate motion for?
They should be
They should be
separate.
separate.
Okay.
That's what
I
I
think
thought.
that's what he was trying to go for. I
Yeah.
think.
Okay,
Okay, so who was second?
I was
You go
focusing on the marijuana moratorium.
Okay,
Vote by roll call.
Counselor Casares,
Aye.
Counselor Seha,
aye.
Counselor Ecclestone,
Aye.
Counselor Lee,
Aye.
Counselor Sini,
Aye.
Counselor Wick,
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
And someone want to make the motion to get psilocybin, us opting out on the ballot?
Opting out, opting in.
Well, I mean, the ballot measure would be, do we opt out? Since it's codified, we would have to opt out. So
Yeah.
the motion would be directing staff to create a draft ballot measure, opting the city of Aumsville out of psilocybin services or measure 109.
Make a motion to direct city staff to draft up a ballot measure for the city of Aumsville to opt out of psilocybin services.
Seconded.
Vote by roll call.
Counselor Casares,
Aye.
Counselor Seha,
Aye.
Counselor Ecclestone,
Aye.
Counselor Lee,
Aye.
Counselor Sini,
Aye.
Counselor Wick,
Aye.
Mayor Clevenger.
Aye.
Passes.
All right, so council, I just looked at the calendar, and it looks like we have a meeting on August 8th. Now, we have to have stuff to you or to us by August 3rd or 4th in order to get it in the packet. So I'm gonna try. It's a very short
Yeah.
window.
Mhm.
I'm gonna really try to get this ready to go for the August 8th meeting, but there's a chance that we might have to call a special council meeting just to approve those two ballot measures in order to make, there's a deadline to get it into the state, but then there's a review period. We want to get it in before the beginning of the review period.
Okay.
Which I think is the 11th. I think the deadline is the 18th.
'cause it's gonna
And
be
so
the
I'm
same
working
as-
back from those dates. So it could be, we may have to do a special meeting later that week if the timing doesn't work out.
All right.
Is there anything from our end, Ron, that you need to help? Like if you need us to like just defer certain things that are coming up on the agenda to maybe, you know, a month out, you know, from to help you meet that deadline is what I'm trying to say.
It's
So-
just a matter of getting, just getting it all done. And we'll get it done. We'll make it happen. I'll put the pressure on the subcontractors. There is some good for both of those. There's probably some good draft language out there that we can grab, so we don't have to reinvent all of that. So we'll work on both of those. And then based on our discussion, we've got time to do this, and we can certainly have discussions of what that looks like, but would you like me to make some draft framework for development code amendments? Because I'm thinking in both of these cases, we would want those located in the industrial park. We certainly wouldn't want to have either of those in the downtown business district.
We do already have the draft, or we already have an ordinance for marijuana.
We had an ordinance,
Yeah.
but
Probably gonna have to tweak
we
it.
dropped it out because it
Yeah.
wasn't approved. And I'm thinking the framework of that ordinance was very, other than zoning, it really did not
Pretty
cover
vague.
things like odor, manufacturing, different things like that. So we're going to want to go a little more in depth knowing what we know today, but I'll draft something. We won't be as critical because obviously that just needs to be done by November 30th. Right? So,
Cool.
all right.
Is there anything else in your report, Ron?
Yeah, just one thing in my report, we did have a booster pump go out in our water, potable water facility. So we're going to be shutting down Wildwood Park tomorrow. And it's just, we want to make sure that we're able to keep up with the capacity. And it's just a public safety issue. I hate doing it. I know people would they're going to be hot and want to use the park, but until we get a new pump installed, which we think we'll get.
We're gonna have a poll tomorrow. The problem is it's gonna take a day or two to get fixed.
So we're 3 or 4 days at least, but we're going to do our best. The other thing is we're talking about getting additional equipment. So we've got some redundancy. It's something we've been working on for the future, but just FYI, we're going to close down the park tomorrow.
Is,
Closing down the whole park or just the splash?
Just the
park?
water.
are we able to shift this out a week until temperatures cool up? Next week, we're dropping down to 78. I mean, tomorrow's supposed to be over 100. Is it going to be a major issue? If we,
I would almost ask for just a voluntary rationing of water. That's where we're at.
The concern is we can't, we've only got so much in the reservoirs.
yeah,
We're running 800 gallons a minute. We've got a 525 gallon a minute pump. Fire pumps going on and off. A 50 horsepower pump going on and off a couple times a minute right now. We're going to shut it off tonight. We already talked to the fire department. They're going to call, we're on call. That's the problem.
If I get in
50 horsepower
a
pump
mob
going
of
on and off.
angry moms at my house tomorrow because Wildwood Park is closed, I'm sending them to you, Steve.
No, I've given you your phone number.
Yeah, you just turn your sprinklers
The
on.
creek is really cool this time of the
We
year.
just jumped in the.
So my concern about shutting down Wildwood is
Sorry, Derek,
people are gonna
you're-
turn our sprinklers on.
I know, and I don't want somebody's grubby kids hopping in my backyard in my pool. That's my pool. Would be
Yeah.
drinking a 6-pack in there.
Mayor, I think Counselor Lee had a comment.
Go ahead, Scott.
My only concern about shutting down Wildwood Splash Pad is people are gonna turn their sprinklers on. So you're gonna run more water in the city versus having the splash pad going.
I mean, what other options do we have, Steve?
You don't have.
We don't? There's no other options?
We're just gonna have to ask for, limit your water use as much as you can.
Okay. Is what it is.
I
If
don't,
I get mauled to death by a bunch of angry moms, you are not speaking at the funeral, Steve.
I will make up a post. I'll ask folks to conserve their water use for tomorrow until we can get the,
It's the worst time to ask for.
it's a terrible time for this to occur, but unfortunately, that's just the nature of what happens. But we'll ask folks to conserve. We'll see how it goes. Okay. If we can get it back up and running right away, we'll do that. If we get good conservation.
Immediately open it back up.
Okay.
How many volunteers do we need to get down there to help strip that pump out and put the new one in?
Anything else, Ron? All right. Anybody got anything to report? Anything for the good of the order?
One thing I do want to comment on, just because we're gonna blink and it'll be here, we want to definitely, I think, probably focus on narrowing down who we're going to do for our Grand Marshal, I think, for Corn Festival.
Yeah, did we
That we voted
get that
on.
decided?
Yeah, the softball team.
Okay.
And Mark.
And Mark, okay,
Okay, awesome.
yeah.
And I have contacted the softball team coach.
Okay.
And he's
Oh,
trying to figure out who's coming. So
that brings up another thing that we had talked about. Harvest Festival, they were wanting to do a shuttle out here. They had reached out to me to talk about a couple of different spots. We were looking at potentially asking Willamette Baptist. But then Ron brought up for something like that, they would need an event permit. I mean, if they've got to fill out a permit, they got to fill out a permit, but can we waive the $50? They're keeping drunk people
Yeah.
off the road.
I can authorize waiving the $50, but they really have to go through the process because there's really no way for us to assess their activity unless they fill
I
out
mean,
the.
It's Uber in mass. That's their activity.
Yeah.
I understand that, but you'd be surprised how many people describe their activity differently, and we need to be able to document it because of our liability. Is traffic control required? Are there any other public safety issues that we have to address? And that's why we have the permit.
Okay, so I'll let them know that they do have to fill out the permit, but are we?
Yeah, we
Waive
can
the
with the
fee.
$50 fee.
Okay.
Yes.
Do anybody got anything else? I got my plane ticket today for my Ethiopia trip, but I believe looking at that one, I'm not gonna miss any council meetings, so that's a non-issue. But I will be gone the 25th of August until the 4th of September, if anything. Ethiopia's got pretty good infrastructure. I'll have internet and all that kind of stuff the whole time, so I don't expect any issues.
Okay.
All right.
No correspondence, so if nobody's got anything, I have 8:38. We can go ahead and adjourn the meeting.